They laughed at him when he spoke. They mocked him when he dreamed. And when a village boy dared to look a rich girl in the eyes, they made sure she laughed the loudest. She told him, "You belong to the dust, not to my world." Years passed. The village forgot him. She forgot him. But fate didn't. One morning, the rich girl walked into a glass building, confident, powerful, untouchable. Only to freeze when she saw the name written at the top of the boardroom door. The barefoot boy she once humiliated was now the man who owned her future. He didn't shout. He didn't seek revenge. He simply looked at her, with the calm of someone who had already won. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. Some people don't come back to remind you of your past. They come back to change your destiny. This is not just a story about success. It's a story about arrogance, silence, patience, and the cost of underestimating someone who had nothing to lose. Watch carefully. Because the ending doesn't scream. It silences. In the heart of Kibra Plains, a village balanced between poverty and pride, lived a boy named Jabari Ndlovu. His home was a small mud house at the edge of the fields, where dust clung to everything and hope felt like a luxury. Jabari's father had died early, leaving behind nothing but a rusted bicycle and a name that no one respected. His mother worked in other people's homes, washing clothes that were never hers, scrubbing floors that would never know her feet as an owner. Every morning, Jabari walked barefoot to the village school, carrying books tied together with a fraying rope. His uniform was faded, patched so many times that the original color was a mystery. Yet his eyes were sharp. He listened more than he spoke, watched more than he reacted. Teachers noticed his intelligence, but intelligence alone did not buy dignity in Kibra Plains. That dignity belonged to families like the Okafors. Amara Okafor was everything Jabari was not. She was rich, confident, and loud in her certainty that the world belonged to her. Her father owned farms, trucks, and half the grain storage in the region. Their house had painted walls, glass windows, and a gate that stayed locked, not to keep people safe, but to remind them where they stood. Amara arrived at school in polished shoes, her hair always neat, her voice always sharp. She laughed easily, but her laughter often cut like a blade. The first time she mocked Jabari, he was 14. The teacher had asked a simple question about land ownership laws. Jabari raised his hand and answered calmly, explaining details even the teacher hadn't mentioned. The classroom fell quiet. For a moment, respect hovered in the air. Then Amara laughed. "Of course he knows," she said loudly. "Poor people always dream about land they'll never own." The class erupted. Jabari felt heat rise to his face, but he did not speak. He lowered his eyes and returned to his seat. Amara leaned back, satisfied. That day, she learned something dangerous, that mocking him came without consequences. From then on, it became routine. Whenever Jabari answered correctly, she called him Professor Poverty. When he stayed late to study, she said, "Books won't change your blood." When he topped exams, she said, "Even goats can memorize." Each word landed, and Jabari absorbed them in silence. One afternoon, fate placed them together in a way neither would forget. The school organized a debate competition, pairing students randomly. Jabari and Amara were assigned to the same team. The topic was leadership and responsibility. Jabari prepared seriously, writing notes late into the night by candlelight. Amara arrived late to practice, bored and dismissive. "We'll lose anyway," she said. "Why should I listen to a village boy?" Jabari looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Calmly, he said, "Leadership isn't about where you come from. It's about what you build." She scoffed. "You'll never build anything." The debate day arrived. Jabari spoke with clarity and depth, dismantling the opposing team's arguments. Amara, forced to follow his lead, delivered her points. They won. The applause was loud. But instead of gratitude, Amara felt something else, threat. Outside the hall, surrounded by friends, she said words that would follow Jabari for years. "Don't get confused," she said coldly. "One day, I'll own companies. You'll still be begging for work. Remember this moment, because it's the highest you'll ever rise." Jabari did not reply. He only nodded. That night, sitting beside his mother as she counted coins for the next day's food, something settled inside him. Not anger. Not hatred. Something quieter. More dangerous, resolve. Years passed, life did not soften Jabari. It sharpened him. When school ended, Amara left for the city, destined for business schools and comfort. Jabari stayed behind, working odd jobs, saving every coin. At 19, he left Kibra Plains with nothing but a small bag and a promise to himself, he would never return the same boy they laughed at. The city was brutal. Jabari slept in crowded rooms, worked during the day, studied at night. He failed, learned, failed again. But he never forgot. Every insult became fuel. Every closed door became a lesson. Meanwhile, Amara's life followed the path she expected. University, connections, privilege. She believed success was her birthright. She rarely thought of Jabari, except as a memory she laughed about with friends. Until one day, years later, a letter arrived at her office. It announced a corporate acquisition. A new executive was coming to take over operations. The signature at the bottom stopped her breath. Jabari Ndlovu. She laughed at first, then her hands began to shake, because the boy she once mocked was no longer a boy, and he was coming back. Amara Okafor spent the entire night staring at the ceiling of her apartment, the city lights flickering through half-closed curtains. The name on the letter replayed in her mind like a stubborn echo, Jabari Ndlovu. She tried to attach the name to the barefoot boy she once dismissed, but the image refused to align with the corporate letterhead, the formal tone, the authority implied by the signature. By morning, she convinced herself it was a coincidence. Names repeated. Villages were full of them. Yet something in her chest remained tight as she dressed for work, choosing a sharper suit than usual, as if armor could protect her from uncertainty. The company building stood tall, glass reflecting ambition and wealth. Amara had worked hard to secure her position there, climbing through internships and connections, though never questioning how easily doors opened for her. That day, the corridors buzzed with rumors. Employees whispered about restructuring, about leadership changes that would reshape everything they knew. At exactly 9, a meeting was called. Amara took her seat among managers and department heads, her posture confident, her face composed. She expected an older man, perhaps someone distant and political. Instead, the door opened and the room fell silent. Jabari Ndlovu walked in without haste. He wore a tailored suit, simple but unmistakably expensive. His posture was straight, his presence controlled. The boy with the frayed uniform was gone. In his place stood a man who did not need to raise his voice to command attention. His eyes scanned the room calmly, briefly resting on Amara. There was no smile, no recognition offered, just a neutral acknowledgement, as if she were any other employee. Her throat went dry, as he began to speak, introducing himself as the new executive director overseeing operations. His voice was steady, thoughtful, deliberate. He spoke about efficiency, ethics, sustainability. He spoke about long-term growth, about accountability. There was no arrogance in his tone, only certainty. The room listened. Amara listened too, though her mind raced elsewhere. Memories surfaced uninvited, her laughter, her words, her certainty that he would never rise. Each recollection now felt misplaced, like a poorly chosen investment. When the meeting ended, people gathered around Jabari, offering congratulations, eager to be seen, to be remembered. Amara remained seated until the room thinned. She stood slowly, straightening her jacket, practicing composure. She approached him. "Jabari," she said, forcing a smile. "It's been a long time." He looked at her as if considering whether the past required acknowledgement. Then he nodded politely. "Ms. Okafor," he replied. "Welcome to the team." The distance in his voice unsettled her more than anger would have. Over the following weeks, Jabari's leadership became impossible to ignore. He arrived early, left late, and asked questions no one had dared to ask before. He reviewed contracts meticulously, uncovering inefficiencies that had been overlooked for years. Departments were reorganized, processes streamlined. Some welcomed the changes. Others resisted quietly. Amara found herself under scrutiny. Reports she once submitted casually were now returned with notes. Meetings she once led comfortably now required justification. It was not personal, at least, not obviously so. Jabari held everyone to the same standard. Yet she could not shake the feeling that she was being seen clearly for the first time. One afternoon, she was called into his office. The space was minimalist, no unnecessary decorations. A window overlooked the city, expansive and indifferent. Jabari gestured for her to sit. "I've reviewed your department's performance," he said. "There's potential here. But also complacency." She bristled. "I've delivered consistent results." "I know," he replied calmly. "Consistency is not the same as growth." The silence that followed felt heavier than any reprimand. She nodded, accepting the feedback, though pride burned quietly beneath the surface. As days turned into months, Amara's world shifted. Colleagues who once deferred to her now waited for Jabari's approval. Decisions were no longer influenced by lineage or confidence alone. Results mattered. Integrity mattered. Slowly, uncomfortably, Amara began to see the gap between who she believed herself to be and who she actually was. Meanwhile, Jabari never mentioned the village. Never referenced the past. But sometimes, in reflective moments, he thought of his mother, of the nights spent studying by candlelight, of the words that once told him he would never build anything. He carried those memories quietly, not as weapons, but as reminders of why power should be handled carefully. One evening, as Amara stayed late revising a proposal, she noticed Jabari still at his desk. The office was nearly empty. She hesitated, then spoke. "You didn't have to come back here," she said softly. "You could have chosen anywhere." He looked up, considering her words. "I know," he replied. "But change is most meaningful where it's least expected." She understood then that his return was not about revenge. It was about balance. And for the first time in her life, Amara felt truly small, not because someone made her feel that way, but because she was standing in front of someone who had grown without her noticing. Amara Okafor began arriving at work earlier than she ever had before, not because she was asked to, but because something inside her refused to remain unprepared. Each morning, she reviewed reports with care, questioned assumptions she once accepted without thought, and listened more than she spoke. The change did not go unnoticed. Colleagues whispered about her transformation, unsure whether it was strategy or survival. Jabari noticed too. He watched quietly as Amara adapted, not with desperation, but with a growing sense of humility. It was a quality he had rarely seen among those raised in comfort. Yet he made no gestures of approval. Respect, he believed, was not granted, it emerged. The company continued to evolve under his leadership. Deals were renegotiated, long-standing partnerships reassessed. Transparency replaced tradition. Some resisted openly. Others left. The village boy who once dreamed by candlelight now reshaped systems with steady hands. One afternoon, a major crisis surfaced. An audit revealed that one of the company's regional suppliers had been exploiting laborers, underpaying them, ignoring safety standards. The discovery sent shockwaves through management. The contract was profitable, deeply embedded, and politically protected. Ending it would cost millions. The board hesitated. Amara sat in the emergency meeting, heart pounding as executives debated risks. For years, she might have argued for discretion, for damage control. But as Jabari listened, silent and attentive, she felt something unexpected rise within her. "We can't ignore this," she said suddenly. Heads turned, she continued, her voice steady. "We talk about growth and ethics, but this is where it matters. If we compromise now, everything we claim to stand for becomes meaningless." The room fell quiet. Jabari looked at her, not with surprise, but recognition. The contract was terminated, the financial impact was immediate, but so was the message. The company's reputation shifted. Trust grew. Employees began to believe in something beyond profit. Later that evening, Jabari called Amara into his office again. This time, the conversation felt different. "You spoke with conviction today," he said. "That takes courage." She exhaled slowly. "I used to think courage was confidence," she replied. "Now I think it's accountability." He nodded. Growth often begins where comfort ends. The distance between them softened, not erased, but understood. As weeks passed, Jabari shared more responsibility with Amara, involving her in strategic decisions. She proved capable, not because she was privileged, but because she learned to question herself. The shift was subtle but profound. Outside the office, memories lingered. One evening, after a long day, Amara found herself driving past the outskirts of the city. Without fully realizing why, she continued until the road narrowed, until the lights faded, until familiar dust settled on her windshield. Kibera Plains. The village had changed little. Children still played barefoot. Women still carried water at dusk. She parked the car and stepped out, the silence heavy with recognition. She remembered laughter, her own voice sharp with certainty. Shame settled gently, not as punishment, but as clarity. Back in the city, Jabari visited his mother regularly. She had aged, but her eyes still held warmth. She watched him with quiet pride, never asking about titles or influence. She only asked if he slept well, if he ate enough. One night, she said, "Remember who you are, Jabari. Power reveals more than it gives." He carried her words into the boardroom, into decisions that affected lives beyond spreadsheets. Eventually, the company announced a major expansion, one that would bring jobs to rural areas, including Kibera Plains. The initiative was met with praise, though few knew how personal it was. When Amara read the proposal, her breath caught. "You're investing there," she said softly. "Yes," Jabari replied. "Opportunity should not depend on where you're born." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the boy she mocked, nor the executive she answered to, but a man shaped by restraint and purpose. For the first time, respect replaced fear. And in that space, something fragile but real began to form: understanding. The announcement of the rural expansion project traveled fast. News reached villages, local councils, and former schoolteachers who still remembered the quiet boy who never argued back. In Kibra Plains, whispers moved through the dust-filled paths, carrying disbelief and pride in equal measure. The name Jabari Ndlovu returned not as a memory, but as authority. Amara read the public response with mixed emotions. Praise for the initiative filled newspapers and screens, but beneath every headline she felt the weight of her own history. The village she once mocked was now central to the future she helped manage. She asked Jabari if she could accompany him on his next visit there. He considered her request longer than she expected. Not out of hesitation, but reflection. "If you come," he said, "come to listen, not to be seen." She nodded. The day they arrived, the village gathered. Elders stood cautiously, unsure how to greet success that once walked among them unnoticed. Jabari spoke calmly, outlining plans for education, infrastructure, fair employment. He did not mention himself. He mentioned responsibility. Amara stood beside him, silent. As the meeting ended, an elderly teacher approached them. He looked at Jabari with moist eyes. "You were always watching," he said. "Even when they laughed." Jabari bowed his head respectfully. Later, away from the crowd, Amara found the courage she had been postponing. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. He turned to her, waiting. "I was cruel," she continued. "Not because you deserved it, but because I never learned to see beyond myself." The words were not dramatic. They were honest. Her voice did not shake. Jabari exhaled slowly. "You were young," he said. "But youth does not erase impact." "I know," she replied. "I can't undo it, but I can acknowledge it." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but necessary. "Growth," he said finally, "is recognizing the harm you didn't intend." That night, as they prepared to leave, villagers approached Amara differently. Not with resentment, not with admiration, but curiosity. She realized respect was no longer something she could assume. It was something she had to earn, every day. Back in the city, the dynamic between them shifted again. Conversations grew more direct. Disagreements happened openly, without power games. The past no longer hovered unspoken. One evening, as rain streaked the office windows, Amara asked a question she had avoided for years. "Did you ever want revenge?" Jabari looked at the city lights, thoughtful. "Revenge would have kept me small," he said. "I wanted freedom." She nodded, understanding at last. For the first time, the roles no longer mattered. What remained was accountability, and the choice to be better than who they once were. Time did not slow after reconciliation. It moved forward, steady and demanding, as it always does. The expansion project progressed, schools rose where fields once lay empty, and employment replaced dependency. Kibra Plains became a reference point in policy discussions, not as a symbol of poverty, but of possibility. Jabari remained deliberate in his choices. He rejected public praise, avoided interviews that centered him rather than the work. Leadership, to him, was not a performance. It was a responsibility carried quietly. His presence in the boardroom became less about authority and more about direction. Systems he built began to function without him, and he considered that a success. Amara continued to change as well. She no longer entered rooms expecting to be heard first. She listened, evaluated, and spoke with intention. Younger employees sought her guidance, not because of her background, but because of her clarity. She became known not for confidence alone, but for consistency. The girl who once laughed at limitation now understood the cost of unchecked certainty. Their relationship settled into something steady and professional, shaped by mutual respect rather than history. There were no dramatic gestures, no public acknowledgments of transformation. Just quiet collaboration. One evening, after reviewing quarterly outcomes, Amara asked, "Do you ever think about the boy you were?" Jabari considered the question. "I don't think about him," he said. "I carry him." She smiled faintly. "I think about the girl I was," she admitted. "And I make sure she doesn't speak for me anymore." Outside the office, life moved on. Children in Kibra Plains studied in classrooms with lights. Mothers earned stable incomes. Opportunity had become structural, not accidental. Years later, when Jabari finally stepped down from his role, the transition was seamless. The systems held. The people continued. That was his legacy. At his farewell gathering, Amara spoke briefly. "Leadership isn't about returning to prove something," she said. "It's about staying long enough to build something that doesn't need you." Jabari listened, eyes calm. As the evening ended, they stood together one last time overlooking the city. No hierarchy between them. No unresolved past, just two people shaped by different beginnings, meeting at the same understanding. Power does not always announce itself. Growth does not always ask permission. And sometimes, the greatest return is not to a place, but to a truth once ignored.